This is Saving America with your host, Dr. David D. Schein, author, professor, attorney, and all-around useful person, presenting the intersection of business and politics. Enjoy common sense commentary and interviews with some of the world's most interesting people. Now here's your host, Dr. David D. Schein.
Thanks, John, for getting our show launched today. We're kicking off this edition of Saving America with my Week in Review commentary. As Americans deal with the high cost of just about everything, and the 2026 elections are approaching fast, what else is going on? ChatGPT sued for helping plan a mass attack. Trump pulling thousands of U.S. troops from NATO countries. Disgraced lawmakers may still get federal pensions. Let's take a closer look at these and other hot stories for week 22 of 2026, followed by my interesting guests this week, Dr. Michael Shires and Dr. Christopher Schorr, talking about the failures in K-12 education. ChatGPT sued for helping plan a mass attack. OpenAI and its well-known AI platform, ChatGPT, have been in the news lately, and it's not necessarily good news. The basic idea is that in 2015, some computer industry heavyweights set up OpenAI as a non-profit. The problem is they needed more money to develop a working model. So they complicated the ownership with a for-profit part that was owned by the nonprofit part. They formed a partnership with Microsoft. Microsoft ultimately put in $13 billion. Elon Musk was involved in the startup, but later left. Sam Altman was the head guy, then fired, and then quickly rehired. His leadership is being challenged again by, of all people, Elon Musk. So the corporate history is fascinating. In the meantime, a first-of-its-kind case has been filed against OpenAI. A suit in federal court claims that ChatGPT helped a shooter organize an attack on Florida State University in April 2025. The attack resulted in 2 dead and 6 others injured. The widow of one of the dead has filed suit. She claims that the shooter was told how, where, and when to plan this terrible incident by the AI program. The suit alleges that the AI program recommended guns and ammunition and how to use the weapons. Rather incredibly, the suit also claimed even the time of day was suggested by the program for when the FSU student union would be the most crowded. Possible legal consequences were also reviewed by the program. In turn, the shooter committed this horrible crime. This topic is not unique, and there have been growing discussions about AI being responsible for helping with suicides and not reporting those inquiries to the authorities. The suit alleges that the AI program actually engaged with the shooter and again did not report anything to the authorities. Parallel to this, the Florida Attorney General has initiated a criminal investigation into OpenAI and ChatGPT. He is reported as saying that if this was a person, they could be charged with murder. Stop. This is not a person. It does not independently think of things. It does not have a moral compass. I believe this is part of a recent path of blaming everyone and everything except the shooter, the person really responsible for the act. While there may be a time in the future where such a case could be brought, in my opinion, this case is premature and the system is just not at that level yet. I will continue to monitor this crazy situation for sure. Thank you for listening to this episode of Saving America. And remember that our episodes are later made available on our YouTube channel at Dr. Dave Saves America. We invite you to join us there and to subscribe. Trump pulling thousands of U.S. troops from NATO countries. Trump has never been happy with NATO. That was true in his first term, and it's true again in his second term. Relating to the Ukraine conflict, he has indicated that it is the Europeans' war, not the U.S. He has also pushed NATO members to fully fund their militaries at 5% of the countries each of their gross national product. However, it seems his relationship with NATO has turned even more negative since the Iran war started. When the U.S. was denied flyover rights and stopovers by various NATO countries for the Iran bombing runs, this seemed to really set off Trump. He has called out Spain, Germany, and the UK for not supporting the effort. The irony, of course, is that the U.S. is energy independent, but Europe is dependent on the Hormuz Strait. So it does seem logical that these countries would support the U.S. effort. The UK has tried to help a little lately, so that is a bit of good news. In retaliation for what Trump views as a lack of reasonable cooperation with the U.S., he has announced the initial withdrawal of 5,000 U.S. troops from Germany, where we presently have about 35,000 troops. This was followed by a drawdown of about 1,000 troops from Poland. Due to the risk to Poland of the Russia-Ukraine war spreading into Poland, there has been more political reaction to that announcement, even though it's a smaller number. Further, Trump has indicated that the current drawdowns are not the only reductions that he anticipates, but he has not provided further details. Disgraced lawmakers may still get federal pensions. Recently, there were two high-profile resignations from Congress: Eric Swalwell, Democrat, California, and Tony Gonzalez, Republican, Texas. I was outraged to learn that these two clowns may receive retirement benefits from Congress at age 62. They only had to be in Congress for 5 years. Swalwell could get $22,000 a year, and Gonzalez could get $15,000 a year. Folks, this is just ridiculous. Some observers note that neither one has been convicted of a crime, and that is the current benchmark. In response to this, Senator Josh Hawley has introduced the No Pensions for Congressional Predators Act, but this would only apply to members who are convicted of sex crimes. And of course, that would not apply here. Look, my regular audience knows that I want all public sector pensions eliminated now. The private sector replaced pensions with the 401k savings plans over the last few decades. Time for the so-called public servants to get the same treatment. I ask everyone who agrees with this con job by Congress to end the call or email their members of Congress and tell them how you feel. Numbers can equal change. Push for this. We also need to get term limits in place. Of course, if you get on the wrong side of things, even an incumbent can be taken out. This was just illustrated brilliantly in the Senate primary in Louisiana. Incredibly, GOP Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana voted in favor of impeaching Trump. That put him in Trump's crosshairs. The primary resulted with Trump-backed Representative Julia Letlow, who got 45% of the vote, followed by State Treasurer John Fleming with 28%. Cassidy came in under 25%, eliminating him from consideration. The two leaders will now move to a runoff. I recently reported vote outcomes in another state where the Trump-backed candidates did very well. So the media polls that show Trump underwater may not be quite accurate. Being upset at high gas prices does not mean voters will support whack job, pro-criminal Dem candidates. England on the mend. Last episode, I reported on elections in the UK that dealt a major blow to the whack left Labour Party that is presently running the UK under the direction of Keir Starmer. Following right behind that, there was a major protest in London called the Unite the Kingdom March. The slopstream media labeled the protest leader, Tommy Robinson, a far-right activist. To me, he is a common sense conservative. The focus was on the decline of the traditional culture of English society. Over 60,000 took part, and that 60,000 was the official number. I'm sure the actual number may be higher. I hope the masses continue to restore their culture. I heard that some even more red "Make England Great Again" hats. Interesting. There were a lot of patriotic and Christian imagery in the crowd. Setting up confrontations, there was a pro-Palestinian rally taking place at the same time in another part of London. 31 arrests were announced by the police, but the general tone was that there were no serious clashes between the two groups. I hope the UK citizens will continue to return their country to normalcy. Tina Peters is finally being sprung from the big house. In a case that smacks of the attempts to stop the investigations of the flawed 2020 presidential election, Tina Peters, a former Colorado County elections clerk, was convicted of lying to state officials. This 70-year-old woman with zero criminal record served 6 months in the local jail and was sentenced to another 8.5 years in prison. Trump had pardoned her, but since this was convicted of a state crime, his pardon did not work at the state level. Well, Dem Governor Polis of Colorado just commuted her sentence. She will be released from prison on June 1. He did say what she did was very serious. I guess that was his cover story. I find it humorous coming from a Democrat where lying seems to be their stock in trade. The action by Polis was triggered by a Colorado appeals court ruling that upheld Peters' conviction but held that the length of the sentence was far too harsh. So he was not directly responding to Trump's pardon, which was issued 6 months earlier. Texas may be conservative in general, but watch for inconsistencies. Houston is home to the Texas Medical Center, reportedly the largest such campus in the world. Within its walls are some of the leading hospitals in America, including the famed MD Anderson Cancer Center. It is also the home of Texas Children's Hospital. That is a place where some infants survive who would not anywhere else in the country and perhaps in the world. I again put in my disclaimer that I do not oppose what adults do, but I am opposed to transitioning minors, so I support the Texas law for sure. However, there's some strange things going on at Texas Children's Hospital, despite the fact that Texas law prohibits transitioning minors. The hospital announced that it would not engage in such activities in early 2022. However, rumors persisted that this was not really the case. Stories included treatments to children as young as 11 getting hormones. The initial trigger was a well-publicized story of such activities at the hospital tied to a leak by a medical resident at the hospital. In retaliation, the young doctor was unfairly prosecuted by the Biden administration, which claimed he violated HIPAA despite the fact that he had not done so. That case was finally dropped when the Trump administration returned to office. The Texas authorities subsequently fought with the hospital for 3 years to get the real story. A settlement was just reached where the hospital will pay a $10 million fine, in quotes here, for billing Texas Medicaid for unallowable and illegal gender transition interventions, including by using false diagnosis codes, and compels the termination and revocation of privileges of multiple physicians. This is tied to 5 doctors who perform such procedures, and the hospital will set up and fund a detransition clinic for 5 years, which is a first for a major medical facility. There will be no charge to the patients for treatment at this clinic during its first 5 years of operation. The feds are also on track and apparently are investigating as many as 20 other medical facilities that may have engaged in such activities in violation of Medicaid and other regulations. And in our special interest report this week, A great story about organ transplants. The University of Virginia Alumni Magazine recently featured a heartwarming story featuring Hannah Sinistra, now a transplant nurse. The story is that Hannah had a family friend who had a 2-year-old who needed a liver transplant. She tried to be a donor, but was not a good fit. The baby's mom was eventually the donor for her own baby. Hannah then found out about non-directed donations. This is where someone donates an organ to someone they do not know. She then changed career direction and became a transplant nurse. The article covers Clara, a baby born in 2021 who needed a liver transplant at only 6 months of age. Hannah donated 22% of her liver to Clara. Hannah's liver regenerated to 90%. And Clara, fortunately, has recovered nicely. Hannah is quoted as saying, "It was scary, it was hard, but it was 100% worth it." Saving America salutes Hannah and the other medical professionals performing such great work for our society. I hope others will be inspired by this story. And that's my Week in Review report for week 22 of 2026. If you enjoyed the show so far, please comment, like, and subscribe on YouTube at Dr. Dave Saves America. I appreciate your support. Now, stay tuned for our first guest. Saving America welcomes Dr. Michael Shires and Dr. Christopher Schorr. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from them, I am sure you will agree that they should be called interesting persons. They're going to talk with us a subject critical to the future of America, education in our K through 12 schools. Dr. Michael Shires is a higher education leader and innovator who serves as vice chair of America First Policy Institute's Center for Education Opportunity. He is a leading expert on all aspects of higher education, governance, finance, and leadership. He recently guided the launch of America's newest free speech-focused university as chief of staff at the University of Austin, or UATX. He earned his master's and PhD in public policy from the Rand Graduate School of Policy Studies and his MBA and BA in economics from UCLA. Dr. Christopher Schorr is from San Diego and serves as director of the AFPI's Higher Education Reform Initiative. In this role, Chris works to develop the initiative's research agenda and advance its policy priorities, including eliminating divisive DEI and gender theory-based practices, promoting academic freedom, combating anti-Semitism, and reforming student loans and accreditation. He co-authored the Amazon bestseller, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. Chris is a Marine veteran of the Iraq War. He earned his PhD and MA degrees in American government from Georgetown University and his BA in political science, summa cum laude, from the University of California, San Diego. We welcome Dr. Michael Shires and Dr. Christopher Schorr for their first appearances on Saving America.
It's exciting to be here with you, David.
Well, we're excited to have you. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Sorry. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting us.
There's so much we could talk about with your extensive credentials, but today let's focus on the status of civic education in America's schools. What's the current status of civic education in our K-12 public school system? How bad is our students' performance on standardized tests?
Chris, you want to take this one?
Yeah, happy to. So we have the National Assessment of Education Progress scores. These saw the first drop recently since they were introduced in 1998. The broader problem, however, is that 1 in 3 students fail to even reach basic civics proficiency. Less than half of students receive civics or government instruction in the 8th grade. Only 7 schools mandate a full year of civics or government instruction in K through 12. Only 5 states mandate any civics at all in middle school. And about 29 states require civics assessment in high school. So we have a long ways to go. In addition to this, we know that much of the civics instruction that's out there is counterproductive. It's not just not good; it's actively harming civics development, civics cultivation, the sort of the broad teaching of our intellectual tradition to the next generation. And we've termed this anti-civics. We can talk here at some length about the sort of critical race theory, neo-Marxist influenced elements. So this would be the ethnic studies curriculum. It would be everywhere the 1619 project has been introduced. And then separately from that, you have action civics, which is it overlaps the sort of neo-Marxist themes, but action civics is really built around the idea that you don't need to teach the fundamentals of American civics and tradition and values and history. Really, what you need to do is focus on the more how-to of American politics. But unfortunately, in practice, that means it's an instruction in left-wing political mobilization. And what we think is not that we should replace left-wing political mobilization with right-wing political mobilization, but rather we think we should teach students the fundamentals of civics, of their country's history and values, and that is the foundation for building the kind of civic knowledge that ties us together as one people in a shared nation.
Yeah,
Well, it's crazy. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say just to kind of stack on top of that too. I mean, the only score in the NAEP that I think was worse than civics was U.S. history, with with a 13% of the eighth graders actually being proficient or above. And so there's this real loss of an American identity in the classroom. And one of the things that it's always bothered me for a long time is, we talk about people that migrate from places as ex-American, African American, Hispanic American. It should be American who's Hispanic, American whose ancestors came from Europe. I mean, it's really about an American identity. And the first job of civics education is to teach that identity. And we've completely surrendered that responsibility in our K-12 schools.
Well, it is interesting to me as we spoke briefly before we started recording, and I went through the traditional thing, and I had a full year, I believe, eighth grade. I did a full year of civics, and then my first year of high school, I did a full year of U.S. history. And what on earth are they teaching? I never heard of action civics, so I appreciate, Chris, your introduction to that. So that's I guess that's called supporting the No Kings rallies.
Well, that is the sort of activity that would fulfill an action civics requirement. There are elements of this kind of thinking that certainly reach all the way up into higher education as well. I remember I was working as a TA for an American politics class, and one of the ways that the students could get credit was by attending a protest or a rally. And I remember thinking, if we were in an engineering school, would you mobilize activism on behalf of some kind of rocket design before you've taken the course and learned how to build the rockets, right? It strikes me that knowing the thing should probably precede activism on behalf of the thing. So action civics puts the cart before the horse, but it's really just an excuse to activate students as a tool for left-wing political mobilization. There's an analysis done by Tom Lindsay over at TPPF on action civics. There is not a single one of these programs that funnels students into anything other than left of center activist organizations and activities. And again, we're not against students doing any of these things. We just think that civics instruction should be about learning about American history and values, and then do with it what you will afterwards. Because the really important point is when we talk about the country coming apart at the seams, it's a lack of a shared narrative, a shared sense of community under a common identity, as Mike was saying. You don't get that from action civics. What you get, you get that common identity. We are all in this together. We have a shared history. You get that from learning about your history and learning about the ties that bind.
Right. And I think one of the misconceptions, you mentioned DEI, and DEI is one of the two acronyms I talk about with my students and say these are the two, ESG and DEI. And it's interesting how in such a short period of time, I'd say over the last 18 months, those two terms have mysteriously disappeared from mainstream talk. There's a few people still saying, oh, that's terrible. But the opponents of taking DEI out have said, oh, you're against things. And I don't regard myself as anyone who is against diversity. I think what we're talking about is the blending, and you can't, the whole power of America is that we took all of these different people and we blended them together in this incredible outcome. It doesn't have anything to do with saying, oh, well, we can't have you because you're this color or that color, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so sorry, Mike. I think the interesting thing about DEI, about critical race theory, ESG, right? All these acronyms. And by the way, the reason the reason the names keep changing is because the old name becomes toxic. This has actually happened at a higher level. The term liberal was jettisoned for progressive and then brought back in for liberal and then jettisoned again for progressive. So it happens when something kind of wears out its welcome. Yeah, the basis is the neo-Marxist oppressor-oppressed dynamic, and the allegation that society, as viewed through that lens, is a mechanism of oppressing certain groups on behalf of others. And then whatever terms are used and mobilized towards making that essential argument, and whatever lens they apply that to, whether it's race or sex, sexuality, you name it. I mean, that's the issue. So you're right. I mean, it's not diversity per se, or any of these other things. But sorry, Mike, you're about to say something.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two aspects of that. One is, in some ways, I think DEI kind of was overplaying the hand of the folks who want to advance this ideology. And so now they've gone into hiding. And by the way, you see these offices disappear. They're not gone. They're now called belonging or something else. But in most campuses, at least at the university level, and certainly in K-12, they've just renamed it. And so it's still there. It's still the ideology that's being advanced in the institution, in part because our ed schools teach the teachers, this is how you teach. And so the teachers have this frame coming into the classroom. But in some ways, it's kind of antithetical. It's all about division, right? It's about dividing people into categories and talking about identity is literally my identity is different than yours. Whereas the American experiment was founded on a common identity that said, these are the things that we hold above all else. And we're going to commit to creating a society that fosters those. And kind of at the core of all of that was a commitment to service and to serving other people. And in our classrooms, part of the socialization that needs to happen in K-12 is literally a conversation about what are my responsibilities to my nation, to my neighbor, to my community, to my state. Do I go, should I go to jury duty, right? These kind of norms, volunteering for military service, the civic virtues, if you will. I should be informed about the election. And the backside of this is, these are all the things we should be teaching. Instead, in our classrooms, what we do, and this is where that action civics becomes the next step, is it's all about my rights. It's what I'm entitled to, not what I'm obligated to do to create those things. And so we've lost, it's the cart and the horse. We've lost the responsibility part, the underpinning, the thing that makes all of that other stuff possible in the total blatant pursuit of the benefits of it without regard to what that costs us in the process.
Well, it's right on point. And of course, in my high school civics class, I learned about something called the Great American Melting Pot. And it was about all for one and one for all. It was about coming together. And we didn't say, well, we need to take this person out and have them be at the front of the row because maybe they came from a different background than we did. And so it's interesting to see how this really valuable stuff has been perverted into where it is today. So we want to transition, talk about that. Why is it critical to return to providing pro-American civics education across the board? And could this help reverse what has been referred to as the assassination culture in our society?
Well, absolutely. I mean, those test scores we were talking about were eighth graders. When you look at how this plays out in society, one of the things we did was we looked at surveys of 18 to 24-year-olds. So think about this as kind of that Gen Z, Alpha Gen borderline there. And, only 40% of those kids could answer four basic civics questions. And I mean, the questions are things like, what are the freedoms in the First Amendment? It's basic questions. Only 61%, which means 39% aren't, were proud to be an American. And only about 1 in 4 of those actually plan to vote in the 2024 election when the survey was done just before the election. And when you get to, folks who are even older than that, 74% of Americans think they can explain America to somebody that comes from another country. But if you ask those same people, those, four basic civics questions, only 58% could get them right. And so this kind of civic illiteracy has created an environment where we really don't, we've lost sight of what we're trying to do. And because of that, you have these divisions, you have this dehumanization, if you will. If you think about a republic that's founded on the melting pot, it's founded on this idea that we're all in this together. And then you pull out that human element and say, well, I don't really owe you anything. And in fact, my identity is more I'm from community X than it is I'm an American. I don't have any responsibility to you at that point. All of a sudden, radicalization, declining patriotism, and this assassination culture that you're talking about. Not only your idea is bad, but you don't deserve to exist because you have bad ideas, right? I mean, it's a dehumanization.
Incredible.
Yeah, totally agree. So the return to pro-American civics education, I think it's important to think about this in the context of where national identity comes from. I mean, we have two basic ways of organizing membership in a national community. We call these civic and ethnic nationalism. Ethnic nationalism is a mixed bag, and it gets a bad rap, some of which is certainly earned. I think, though, most of us would agree that what makes the United States unique is our civic national tradition, our foundation in universal values, commitment to the Constitution, the rule of law, liberty, equality, under law, popular sovereignty, and so on. These are things that have to be taught. They're not from the blood, they're not from the soil. So that involves public education, involves education in private schools as well. And one of the biggest ironies, we were talking about critical race theory, ethnic studies. The people who would tell you, who would express the greatest concern over ethnic nationalism, at least as expressed by majority groups, are the people who are demolishing civic nationalism the most aggressively, right? And that doesn't leave anything. It's one or the other. You have to pick one, or you have fragmentation, and you default essentially to ethnic nationalism in the Balkans kind of format. So, so the teaching our civic traditions in K through 12 schools, it's not overstating to say that it's existential. I mean, this plays out over a long period of time. It's not like we drop 2 points on the NAEP scores and tomorrow there's no country. But this destroys the foundation for national belonging by failing to educate students in this way. And then the point about assassination culture. So assassination culture is a term that was that came out of the University of Rutgers, and what they're talking about is this phenomenon on the political left specifically. There isn't much of this on the right, which isn't to say that you don't have a Timothy McVeigh here and there, but the sort of enthusiasm, the kind of bloodlust for murder, frankly, among highly online, usually left-wing young men. Some of them may identify in different ways, but they're usually men. This is a phenomenon on the left. It's the point, though, of calling it out is not to sort of emphasize its left-wing origins. It's really to say that, like, this is a feature of social disintegration. If this somehow emerged on the right, it would be every bit as terrible. The point is that when we are coming apart at the seams, this is the kind of thing that emerges, and this is what exacerbates it, and this is what we're up against. And of course, the values that would inform assassination culture as it currently exists are deeply and profoundly anti-American and anti-civics as in any meaningful sense.
And we've certainly had, unfortunately, parallel to this. It seems a great deal of violence in our society, and that people don't seem to respect human life. I mean, I remember that it was extremely rare for a policeman to be shot because that was considered an assault on our society itself. And yet we hear about the number of police who are physically assaulted in addition to being, number being killed each year. And it doesn't seem that there's respect for a central social culture, a mutual respect among ourselves, definitely seems to be missing. And I see it, the failure of K-12 and Technicolor, because I taught a second year course. I usually teach grad students and seniors, but they drafted me to teach a second year course, which was more than half first year students. And they were so undisciplined and they were so divorced from the understanding of respect in the classroom. I mean, look, I have always respected my professors, my high school teachers, those nuns who taught me in grammar school. I mean, it was intrinsic to what we do. And I'm sorry, but I think I'm pretty thick-skinned, but I was like, what is happening here? So I actually went and told the administration at my university. I said, you can't have me teaching these first and second year students because they don't know enough to be college students. They don't deserve, to be blunt, they don't deserve somebody like me sharing my expertise with them. The other part seems to be that there's so much missing. And I know this may seem strange, but in teaching business law, I will invoke occasionally historical novels and things like that. One that I particularly reference is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, one of the 100 great novels of America. I will poll my students, and my students rarely say that they have read that book in high school. And so again, it's parallel. We were talking about civics education, but it seems that we've lost the sense of a traditional education, and civics is part of that, but also reading great American works or even Shakespeare for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole idea that I mean, part of this is because there's been this filtering of what literature is taught in school, and it turns out that folks who don't have the right skin color or came from a Western tradition have been de-emphasized in exchange for kind of new, more radical writings from folks who have different perspectives. And so you lose some of that history and context. And the Western tradition is based on the Western canon, right? It's based on the thinkers and the writers from the Western tradition. And Asia has a totally different tradition, a totally different history, totally different set of canons and traditions, and they tend to be a collectivist society, whereas we tend to be individualist. And I mean, those fundamental differences in the cultural context reflect in the literature. The thing is, the American model was built on that Western tradition, and it's been successful. I'm not saying it's any different than the others, but it's been successful for America. And so when we turn our back on it, what we're doing is kind of throwing out the infrastructure of what we built our entire system around. I mean, Tocqueville cited, classical literature in his review of America, and we cite him I taught public policy for 24 years. He was a favorite, topic of conversation because he saw this thing in its birth and his interactions with it. His insights were profound coming from a European and a continental perspective.
Well,
Yeah,
I wonder, I'm sorry, Chris, I was just going to say, I wonder how many of our current day students know who de Tocqueville was. And it's such great work of literature in addition to the observations that he made.
Yeah, Tocqueville's essential. I would add to what Mike is saying that I think that when we decide that we need to elevate sort of superficial descriptive representation in readings and scholarship above the great works, what we're essentially saying is that students who come in different colors and backgrounds and so forth that we're essentially saying that they're not full members in our civilization and in our tradition because the foundational past texts and documents don't apply to them. So it's this irony. It's similar to the whole idea of the bigotry of low expectations. There's this sense in which we're accommodating, but actually the accommodation betrays a sense of inferiority that you just have to scratch the surface to see. I mean, and we could give 1,000 examples of this, right? Like, of course, you can't get at voter ID. You're African American. How would you get voter ID? These things are absurd, but you see it time and time again. And I think the example of literature is just a fantastic one. I mean, you can't replace Shakespeare. What are we talking about?
It's interesting, and there is some racial and religious overtones in Shakespeare, but we should have students who are educated enough to see the positives and the negatives, and that's not what we're teaching today. But it's a fascinating thing. Gentlemen, you're much younger than me. You may not remember the bicentennial, but I vividly remember 1974, 75, 76, and I remember the intense excitement of the bicentennial. And I have to say, as we roll through it this year, I'm not seeing that same level of intensity and excitement. So how does America's 250th birthday provide an opportunity to promote a return to America's founding principles?
Well, I might be closer in age than you think. I remember the bicentennial well. In fact, I still have a jar, actually it's a bag now, full of bicentennial coins, right?
Yes.
They issued new coins for the bicentennial, the Freedom Train. And I mean, there was a real celebration, that went from city to city across the country. I mean, there was a real celebration. I think that's happening. I mean, it's harder to see because the media is focused on whatever stories they think will get them clicks and viewers. But the backside of it is if you go to our classrooms, if you go to our schools, Secretary McMahon and the Department of Ed has invested in this scholarship competition, touring the country to talk about it. This study actually is part of that conversation. And there's another study coming out where we're going to be talking about what you can do. And we're focusing kind of on 4 key audiences. We're focusing on states and how they can celebrate it and how they can adopt policies that foster civics education, school districts, schools, and individual schools, and then families and parents. And so, but I think there is a vibe out there. I mean, I live in DC right now and a big chunk of the year. And I can tell you when I walk down the street, those school kids are still totally excited to see the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial and to go into the Capitol. So the enthusiasm is there amongst the kids. I mean, sometimes the challenge is getting the enthusiasm amongst the teachers. But there is a vibe, and this is our window of opportunity. This is where we get to go out and say, all of these things are important. And in this anniversary year of the founding of the Republic, of our Declaration of Independence from England, this is our opportunity to get this story into the classroom. Teaching civics is about storytelling. And, it's the most powerful tool we have. And part of what we've lost are those positive narratives of what being an American means. And this is our chance to tell all those stories again.
Yeah. And in line with that, what I would love it if we could focus on as a country, as we observe the 250th anniversary, is civic virtue. Civic virtue, it of course goes to this topic of balancing rights and responsibility, but civic virtue is the essential quality to cultivate in public schools. We don't often think about public schools in the context of moral instruction for good reason, but there's an aspect of moral instruction that is inherent in public education in supporting a republic because we have popular sovereignty, because in a system where the thing of the people, res publica, when it essentially it is the property of the people, then the character of the people determines it drives the ship of state. It determines where we're going. And so I think cultivating these virtues, public spiritedness, honesty, respect for the rule of law, self-restraint and moderation, that's always something that we gripe about with the young. And yes, I'm old enough now to gripe about the young. And yes, tolerance and diligence, prudence, all these things. I mean, this. Although I didn't make the bicentennial, but these I think are essential elements of reconnecting with our nation's founding. And I think it's a good opportunity to say, okay, what does it mean to be a republic? What does that imply about the sort of men and women we should be, the kind of citizens we should be?
Do you think that'll help reverse this ridiculous trend towards teaching socialism and anti-capitalism in our schools? I find that so offensive.
I think the answer to that lies in some of the things that we've done. I mean, quite frankly, some of our public schools may be, will take a long time to save, I guess is the best way to describe it. So I think a lot of the work around school choice that we're doing today, giving parents and families options and alternatives to the public school classrooms. We're working at AFPI on how we can create credentialing tracks that don't necessarily go through schools of education where a lot of the teachers are indoctrinated in these kind of socialist ideologies. And then I think it's just confronting it straight on. I mean, this idea that we need to have a public debate about what it means to have DEI in an environment. And that, I mean, America was founded. It's not like having different groups of people who think differently is new to America. We've been doing this for 250 years, and that's been part of our success. The question is, at what point are we willing to come together and say, this is what we're willing to commit to as a community? And we've lost that unifying part. And it literally is, what is it? United we stand, divided we fall. I mean, there literally needs to be that unifying vision. This is an opportunity for us. I think we will gain some ground this year, but there's a lot of work left to do.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, we've elected an overtly socialist mayor in New York, and we have a governor in Virginia who ran as a moderate and has been about as left-leaning as you can get. And how do we overcome the local politics to get to the students themselves? What's the angle that we need to work?
Well, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no. Well, actually, I was thinking more. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. I think Mike.
Well, no, I was going to say, actually, you're probably better to answer this because you have kids in the classroom right now, right? I mean, this is about families engaging with their schools, and it starts at home, and it goes to the school campus, and it goes to the school district, and it's about not letting the other side control the dialogue. It's about, if you believe in these transcendental American values that all men are created equal and that it's all about opportunity. This is why people immigrate to the United States. If that's what you believe, then you need to stand up for that in your classrooms and call your teachers and teach your kids to have these conversations with their teachers and classmates as well.
I think an important part of this is that it's recognizing that civic knowledge and civic virtue are in some ways antithetical to a lot of the trends that we've been discussing. So to be a socialist in America is a lot like being a monarchist. It doesn't, you can do it. It's in fundamental conflict with the nation's founding values and principles. I mean, you can be, to be a socialist is to abandon procedural equality for equality of outcome. It's to abandon liberty, obviously. It's to abandon the rule of law as you're seizing people's assets. And it's worth recalling that communists called themselves socialists. We called them communists. They called themselves socialists. And so to be a communist, or maybe a true socialist, is to abandon also popular sovereignty and any sort of sense of control over the state and to be reduced to slave status. And so I think that when you teach students the fundamentals of American history and values and tradition, and you teach them the virtues necessary for sustaining that tradition, some of that will filter into committed far left people and make them better people. Like, I would rather have a more honest socialist than a less honest socialist. I don't know how long you can stay a socialist with a true spirit of public spiritedness and honesty and respect for the rule of law. But I'm willing to give it a try and see how they can get better. And I think it sort of filters up from there. I think that's kind of the magic of civics instruction and of cultivating the virtues in people. On specifically on socialism, though, and this is an age thing, and I'll take the prerogative of being the young buck here. I do think there is a certain Reagan-esque quality to talking about socialism per se and emphasizing the economic things rather than the critical race theory neo-Marxist threat that is or until recently was fully embraced by corporate America, by all the institutions of our society, certainly our government. It really is a greater threat, in my judgment, than traditional economic Marxism. Of course, the radicals will be committed to both, but I think a lot of what's happened with the embrace of socialism among the young is that the brand has lost the toxicity that it had from the Cold War. But the shift to the left, the sort of large-scale movement of the left, further left, and you can observe this in polling data where it used to look sort of like a bell curve, and now it's like a ski slope, right? That has occurred to some degree on economic issues, but it's occurred much more on these cultural and identity and lifestyle issues. And those are far, far more fundamental to the long-term health of the country. Screwing up economics, you learn pretty fast how that doesn't work. Mom Donnie's going to figure some of these things out, right? I mean, you can do the billionaire tax and, where'd all the billionaires go, right? I mean, it happens time and time again. The kind of damage to the civic fabric takes a much longer time to sink in, but it's I think more long lasting, more of a challenge.
Well, it's interesting to me because I think and we're talking about civics education, and we don't often talk about economics as an undergraduate or a grammar school or middle school topic. But what's missing is the fact, and I lived through virtually the entire Cold War, and my dad, by the way, was career military, so he was in for 28 years, and so most of my childhood, obviously, and early adulthood. And the USSR failed, Venezuela failed, Cuba failed. What part of this ain't a good idea, it don't work for people, are we not teaching to the last two generations of kids? I mean, to me, it's like I knew from a very early age the consistent failure of socialism and communism, and we're not teaching that today.
One of the astonishing things is that the communist Chinese won't allow the TikTok that our students receive in the United States in China, because they regard the sort of the cultural degeneration, and they would regard it that way as well, as a threat to their national cohesion. So the communists view us as to the left of them on these issues. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the economic stuff will play out in a predictable way. What's the joke? Real communism has never been tried, and it never will be, right? Because every time it fails, well, that wasn't real communism.
That's right. Pretty good story, gentlemen. We try and keep this down to a certain length so that people will actually listen to this and benefit from what we're talking about. So how can our audience get more information about both of you in this important topic of restoring civic education to the American school system?
So Chris and I can be found at americafirstpolicy.com. It's a all one word website. If you want to get more specific information about civics, and the Department of Education is in partnership with America First Policy Institute, there's a website called america250civics.com that is a link to the department's efforts in helping schools embrace the 250th anniversary. And we're excited to be, part of the leadership in putting that together. So those are the two resources.
Much appreciated. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Thanks for joining us, and please check us out on YouTube at Dr. Dave Saves America. I want to thank all my fans for watching our shows or participating in our shows or listening to our shows. It all makes a difference. And I wanted to especially visit on this particular day because we shot past our objective. We were shooting to have 1,000 people enrolled on our Facebook page, and we shot past that, and it's very exciting for me. And I wanted to back up just a little bit and share my story as to why this is so important to me. Saving America is not just a name of a show. It's my commitment to our country. And it's my commitment to every loyal American out there who wants to see this country continue to be number one in freedom and love of country across the world. And I just thought it's important to share that with you. I've always been a conservative. Yes, even from a little kid, came from a military family, so that's not unexpected. But I never had this question period that we see so many people in high school and college go through this thing where they're not so happy with the United States. I've never had that impression. And it's been something that I've always been committed to making the best of myself and to being a contribution to my country. And part of that objective was to get a higher education. I'm a first-generation college student. My parents did not attend college. My dad attended a little bit of college later. But it was something about being somebody, bringing some value to the country. And in my many careers, I've come to the point where I'm giving back by being a professor and also by sponsoring and producing Business Law 101 and Saving America. And so one of the things that I did, how I got started in this, is I've always been interested in talking, big surprise. I was a debate star in high school. And then in college, I ended up on radio. I was actually on public radio in Philadelphia. And then went through a long period where it just focused on education and my corporate life and my business life. Later got a chance to be on radio again in Richmond, Virginia with a show called It's Your Job to talk about the employment area, which is my professional area of interest. And then I went through some real changes by becoming a professor. I began to understand writing and doing research, and I produced my first book, Decline of America. And it's a positive book. It says we have become a great country despite who's been in the White House, because we frankly haven't had the best people in the White House. But what we have done is we've had the best American people putting this country together, winning 2 world wars, winning the space race, winning the Cold War. And it's been very exciting. But I want people to understand how important it is that we get control of our government, which has been out of control, largely spun out of control by FDR during the Great Depression. He used the Great Depression to basically abuse the concept of limited government. And we've had, unfortunately, a lot of politicians who've participated in keeping the bureaucracy running, and that's both parties. And I produced my second book, Bad Deal for America, and it's a nonpartisan book. It's 26 Republicans and 26 Democrats who are saying some of the dumbest things you've ever heard. And yes, these people are on our payroll, and we need to do the best with it. So please continue to watch, continue to listen, and we appreciate the support from every one of you.